Alright, hi everyone, and welcome back to Product Training with Blue Triangle. Today we're going to talk about our network health check endpoint of our API. This endpoint contains both raw and aggregate data on your network health checks. You'll see part 7 there in the title, but don't worry, we're going to start today with a recap on the basics, like how to connect to the API and what a basic request looks like. And then we'll get into more involved examples and discuss how to construct the request to the API for your desired data. Alright, so my name is Mark, and I'm the support manager here at Blue Triangle, and we do these training sessions each week about various topics related to web performance, analytics, and ultimately how to use Blue Triangle to solve problems. So let's go ahead and get started. As far as the agenda today, we're going to start with an introduction to the API, and that's going to involve a quick overview of the current API endpoints. We'll get into how to connect to the API, how to find your API key, and probably one of the most important parts of this training today is how to get the API request JSON for any graph in Blue Triangle. So stay tuned for that. After a few minutes of an intro on those items, we'll get into the network health endpoint. We'll get into how to construct the request JSON with the minimum required parameters, and then we'll introduce some filter options and other response formatting parameters and things like that. So the last thing is we'll finish with Q&A, so be sure to ask your questions while we're going through today, and I'll be happy to answer those the best I can at the end of our session. Alright, so getting started. This is a list of all of our API endpoints. We've done a training on virtually all of these except for the one we're going to be doing today, which is network health. And the network health is actually broken into two different endpoints, if you will. The network health proper is for aggregate data on the network health checks, and the network health hits is for raw data on the network health checks. So now if you don't even have any network health checks set up, this endpoint isn't going to be something that's useful to you. And if that's the case, I would recommend going into our help center to check out our past training on the network health checks. We go through everything from how to configure a monitor to how to view the data in the Blue Triangle portal, how to get alerts, how to configure and tune those alerts. So that was a great session we did about a month ago. And kind of the prerequisite here is you'll need to have network health check monitors up and running for there to be any data here. So I'm not gonna go through all of these endpoints, but we have done a training on them, and you can find that in our help center. Some of our past trainings also linked to them in the about description of our session today. So you can check out those links for other API endpoints. But today we're going to focus on the network health. All right. So a couple of quick things. The first is how to access the API documentation. If you're in Blue Triangle, you can click the question mark icon and go to the Help Center, and under the big button for documentation there will be a new page with a section for API documentation, which has loads of great information about the API and its various endpoints. You can also go directly to the API documentation at help.bluetriangle.com, and when you're there you can also search for API documentation. The search feature works very well. Wanted to point that out here in the beginning. So how to connect to the API. You can do it in a variety of ways. You can do it with programming language like Python or something more like curl on the command line. You can do it really in any way you can think of, but today we're going to be using examples. We're going to be showing examples in Postman. It's an API testing tool that's very robust and easy to use. So in order to connect to the API, you're going to need two headers. There's eventually going to be three, but the two authorization headers are going to be the X API email and the X API key. So this is the email associated with your login in Blue Triangle, and this API key can be found in your Blue Triangle profile, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Requests are typically a post. Any endpoint that has data is going to be a post of JSON content, and the JSON is basically the parameters of which you can manipulate the query for the data. Anyways, both of the endpoints we'll be using today will require a post. One more thing, the email addresses and API keys are case sensitive, so keep that in mind. If you're having trouble connecting, double check the case of these two headers. So finding your API key, like I mentioned, it's in your profile in Blue Triangle. So kind of another prerequisite here is to have an actual login to Blue Triangle, or at least maybe a shared login, because you will need to look in the profile and get an API key. These are automatically generated for you right when you create the login to Blue Triangle. So for this artificial user in the profile table here, this is their API key. Alright, so this is an example request in Postman. I just have it here to kind of show you what it all looks like put together. It's not for the network health endpoint, but I just want to point out a few things. We're going to be doing a post to the endpoint, and I'll tell you what that is here in a second. We're going to have our body here. So we're going to select raw in Postman, and we're going to go over to this drop down and choose JSON, application JSON. Then we're going to plug in our JSON, and we'll show you how to form that, which is the purpose of our training. And then you'll see a response also in JSON that contains the requested data. So basically, this is kind of what it looks like all put together, and the rest of our presentation today or session is going to be on building the actual JSON in here to get the desired data. Before we get in any further, I want to show you how to get the API request JSON for a graph in Blue Triangle. For example, let's say we're on the real user performance detail page. Pretty much any graph in Blue Triangle that has one of these hamburger menus, you'll be able to scroll down to and view the JSON for the API, and that's going to show you the endpoint that this JSON is for, and the JSON itself that generates the data in the graph. So you can copy that really easy and close that modal. So that's one thing. That's a great way to get started with our APIs, to just snag this in here and start to manipulate it and see what kind of things you can do with it. But so be sure to keep that one in mind. So let's talk about the network health endpoint. As I mentioned, there are a couple of endpoints or API endpoints or URLs, however you want to define it. There's network health and network health /hits. Let's just start with the network health regular, and we're going to be doing a post to that network health endpoint, but we're just going to use the required parameters. So from the documentation, we can see that these are the required parameters: site, start and end, data columns, and group. These are the same as the performance endpoint, if you're familiar with the performance endpoint, minus the data type parameter. So let's look at each of these parameters a little closer and just make sure that we know what information needs to go in here. So first, the site parameter, it tells the API which site to pull the data for. This is unique for every site. Depending on your configuration, you may only have one site or you may have several, but your site prefix, which is the what's going to go in here, can be found on the sites page of the portal, or if you have a real user JavaScript tag that you're using for us, it's going to be the host name of that JavaScript tag. So, for example, demosports.btttag.com/btt.js. Demo sports in this case is the site prefix. So that's the site parameter. If you have any questions about that, if you can't find your prefix, just reach out to us and we'll get you that real quick. All right, the start and end parameters. I won't spend a lot of time here. It's basically just a epoch in milliseconds. It's the start and end of the time period you want to view data for. So this is like the time period selector in the Blue Triangle portal. epochconverter.com is a great tool for, in fact, I might use that here in a second as we do a little more interactive work together. Yeah, human readable to epoch, epoch to human readable, etc. Yeah, great tool there. All right, so the next thing is the data columns parameter. This is going to be typically performance metrics and numerical data. If the option you're looking for is not in the filters menu and it's something that's displayed in a graph or table of the portal, then you're typically going to include it in the data columns field. So if you are familiar with SQL, this is basically the select clause of your SQL query, if you will. So some of the common ones are time, latency average, jitter, etc. We're just going to throw in page hits down here, and that just means how many tests ran, right? All right, and the last required parameter is the group or group by parameter. This is typically text fields. If a field is in the filters menu, then it's likely a dimension that we can group on. So if you're familiar with SQL, this is the group by clause of the query, or closest thing to, you can think about it that way. Some of the common group parameters or options are traffic segment, page group, page name, agent location, things like that. So we basically have a valid request now, and it's basically saying over this, I think it's a 24-hour time period, show me the page hits broken out by page name, right? So this was our request, and over to the right we can see the response, and it looks like we have 4 synthetic monitors running, and you can see the number of measurements or tests that have run over our 24-hour period here. So I'll just pull up Postman quickly and kind of show you what this looks like. So if I copy this, thanks. So here I am in Postman, right? I have api.bluetriangletech.com/network health, and we're doing a post to that URL. And I'm not going to share my API key, but you can be sure that I have my email and my API key set in my headers over here. And then, of course, body is going to be raw, JSON, and then this is the request. So if I hit send, it'll take a couple of seconds, and I think raw is actually prettier than pretty. So this is kind of what the response is going to look like. One of the things while I'm here that you can do inside of Postman is export this to code. You can export it to literally all of these different languages and formats. I'm a Python guy, so I like probably Python requests. It's a great tool so this request is literally copied and into a working Python script now. So click of a button. So that's another cool thing. But let's move on. So that was a basic example for the network health endpoint. The next thing we're going to do is one for network health hits endpoint. All right. So this is actually going to be real quick because we're going to use the same required parameters except for the group parameter. So since we're looking at raw data, we're not doing any grouping of the data. So this endpoint is more for like fine-grained, detailed analysis type queries. So as a basic request, we're going to get our required parameters together. And in the data columns, I'm just throwing in time and page name. And that is going to produce this response over here to the right. So we'll get time. This is epoch milliseconds. And the page name is the name of the monitor. So that's one for the network health / hits endpoint. So let's get into an example of some filter options. And we'll take kind of a practical example here. Let's say we want to sort of replicate some of these numbers on the network health checks performance detail page. Let's say we'd like to pull the average latency, jitter, and packet loss, just a couple of these metrics in these cards for synthetic monitors over a 6-hour time period. However, we only want to see data from the test with the page name network health check monitor - blue triangle help center. So let's see what this looks like. So we're going to start with the minimum required parameters. This is the best place to start, as always. The endpoint here is going to be aggregate data, so we're going to use the network health endpoint. We're going to specify the site. Obviously, the start and end is a 6-hour period. So we could use epochconverter.com to make sure we have those correct. Whoops. And then down in data columns, we're going to get latency average, jitter average, and packet loss. And these are all found in the documentation for this endpoint. So be sure to double check that and make sure you know what you're putting here in your data columns. Now for the group by, we're going to group by page name because we basically only want to see one result. So we're just going to group it by the one page name. And now the missing piece here is the filter option that says only show us data for this particular page name. And so that's going to look like this. So we have all of our required information. The page name is just going to be another array, and it's going to have this one page name. So if we shoot that off to the API, we're going to get this one result, and that's going to show us the data, same data over here to the right as we're looking at to the left. It looks like the API is doing a bit of rounding, but this is how you can validate the response by looking at a similar time period and set of filter options in the actual Blue Triangle portal, and that'll help you validate the request. All right, so there's one more example I wanted to cover before we come up on our time here, and that is, let's reproduce a scatter plot. So this is going to be raw data. The first thing that comes to mind should be, okay, this is raw. We want the individual page hits or tests. So this is going to be raw data. So that means we're going to be pulling from the network health / hits endpoint. But let's see what the thing is here. So we want to pull the measurement time, page name, and agent location for tests over a 5-minute period. We only want to see data from the monitor with that same page name. So we're gonna be sure to add that filter option there. And then obviously this is much like pulling data from a scatter plot. Minimum parameters. We're going to start with the site, start and end, and data columns. Remember, the group parameter is not an option for the hits network health / hits endpoint. We have a 5-minute period here in the start and end, and we have measurement time, page name, and agent location as we described in the the use case or the example scenario here. So now that we have all of that, I think the last thing we need to do is add the page name filter again. So based on what we described as the use case, this is the JSON that we've come up with. And just like the other one, we can send that to the API and then validate the response. So we can see that there are 5 total items over this time period, and we could do some spot checking about, is this the right agent location, or is this time corresponding to this time? So it's always great to ensure that you validate the response to some degree to make sure that you have the data that you're looking for. All right, so I wanted to cover maybe 1 or 2 more examples, but it looks like we're coming up on our time here. So to kind of summarize our session today, we went over the network health and network health/hits endpoints. These endpoints have a few required parameters, and they are the site, start, end, data columns, and group. And remember, the group is only for the network health endpoint. The network health/hits endpoint does not use the group parameter. You should always start with a simple request and sort of build up from there, and validate the response each time along the way. One of the best ways to ensure you are pulling the right data is to pull up a similar graph or table in the Blue Triangle portal and compare the output. Now, if you're troubleshooting a request or you're looking for something that we haven't covered today, definitely check out the documentation for that particular endpoint, or just do some good old-fashioned searching in our help center, and that should actually help you quite a bit. And but ultimately, if you do get stuck on a problem, or you have any other questions, we're always happy to chat. So definitely reach out to us via support or your account manager, and we're always happy to jump on and help out with stuff. So all right, so that brings us to questions. I'm going to pause now and see if there's anything I can help answer for you guys. Okay, questions. So I'm not seeing any questions, and that's just fine, because we only have a couple minutes left of our 30 minutes here today. So I'll go ahead and close things out. Really appreciate everyone's time today. And if you do have any questions, we're always happy to chat with you offline, like I mentioned. So feel free to reach out to us anytime. You can reach us at any of the emails listed here. Support, obviously, we're always happy to hear from you and help you out. You can also check out our help center, which I don't have it up here, but it's help.bluetriangle.com. And when you're there, you can submit a request or a question, and we'll get back with you as soon as possible. All right, guys, thanks again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Have a great afternoon.